This morning. We have a very special partnership with the county, so thank you for being here. We're here today to announce our way forward for the January 8th memorial and to clear up some misunderstandings that we've had after the news that the Arizona State bill did not receive a hearing in the Senate. And we are here united to tell you that we move forward today. This is not a political issue. People from all viewpoints were injured and killed on January 8th, 2011. We're asking you, the community and the nation, to stand with us at this time and to show that democracy is still alive. On that tragic day, our basic democratic freedoms were attacked. People, while meeting with their representative of all beliefs, were unjustly attacked, and we are here to build a memorial to celebrate the lives of those we lost, the survivors that are still with us today, and the response from the entire nation. As many of you know, it did not just affect Tucson. People from around Arizona came, gathered support. People flew from all over the United States, and today we still feel that support together. This morning, it is important that you hear why this memorial is so important from the people who are directly involved. You will hear from a first responder who was one of the very first on the scene that day. You will hear from a registered nurse who happened to be doing her grocery shopping and took it into her own hands to run out and aid those who were injured and killed. You will also hear from a survivor and what this memorial means to this group. So with that, I would like to welcome our first speaker from Northwest Fire, Brian Keeley.
Good morning. I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. I'd like to thank the members of the media for being here. You carry this message farther than any one of us individuals could. I'd like to give a special thanks to Crystal and her team at the January 8th Memorial for their relentless pursuit to see this dream come to life. My name is Brian Keeley, and I'm a captain and public information officer with Northwest Fire. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the tragedy that occurred on January 2011 occurred within our district, and I was part of the first wave of responders on scene that day. The significance of what occurred was clear from the moment we stepped on scene. What was not known at that moment was a range of emotions that would be felt in the days, weeks, and years to follow. Now, just over 6 years later, those emotions have become memories. For the survivors, the families of the victims, the witnesses to the event, and the first responders, that day cannot be forgotten. We are the living memorial to that day, and for now, we are the keepers of history. We hold the memories of what occurred on that day, as well as the days and weeks to follow, safely in our minds. This history, however, is not ours to keep. This tragedy was not our tragedy, it was our community's tragedy and our country's tragedy. It is our desire to see this memorial built so that history can be transferred to the generations who have yet to come. It is our desire to remember those who were injured, those who gave their lives, and the community who stood steadfast behind them. It is our desire to once again show that good always overcomes evil and hope overcomes despair. This memorial must be built and will be built so that anyone can come to learn about what occurred that day and reflect upon its significance. All who walk away from it will realize, as I have, that out of the tragedy of that day came hope and strength of a community united. For better or worse, history cannot be undone. It can only be remembered, learned from, and shared. It is our responsibility to give honor to those who died that day by creating a place of eternal remembrance. And it is our responsibility to ensure that their memory is not forgotten. Thank you.
And now I would like to introduce to you a community citizen who wasn't at work that day. She was simply at the grocery store, and without regard to thinking about her own safety, ran out of the Safeway to render aid. Welcome, Nancy Bowman. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. You know, I've told my story several times about how my husband, who's a doctor, and I'm a nurse, we were pretty much walking into the Safeway as the gunman was coming out of the Safeway. And I reflect now on what happened after that event. When I finally got home that day and got into the shower and watched the blood of other people swirl down the shower drain, and I went out and put my head in my husband's lap, and I just shook. I just shook. I'm like, what now? And then it started happening. The phone calls from neighbors and friends and church members and family members, and the cards and the letters. And then there were the invitations for counseling from members of the fire department and prayer vigils. And it just seemed like the entire community just embraced us and enveloped us in love and concern and care, compassion, and support. And so, you know, it reminds me of that song that was written after 9/11 by Alan Jackson. He says, "Where were you when the world stopped turning?" Well, I think of where were we when tragedy hit Tucson. And it seems like so many in this community, just about everybody, has a story to tell about their 2 degrees of separation from that event. Either they were there, or they knew somebody there, or they brought candles to the memorial at UMC, or they flooded Gabrielle Gifford's office with flowers, or they helped build the Gabe Zimmerman trailhead, or the Christina Taylor Green Butterfly Garden, or they went to a concert for civility, respect, and understanding with musicians from Keb Mo to Alice Cooper. And everybody seemed to get involved in the way that they could. They created beyond events that still go on today, from yoga to trail hikes. And I'm just very struck at how much this community responded and how beautifully they responded. Many of us here have traveled throughout the country since then to other tragedies that are similar to ours, trying to help the victims to get through their heartbreak. And other communities did not respond like Tucson, Arizona responded. They did not get the full embrace of the community like we did. And from Aurora to Newtown, they tell us stories about how lonely they felt and how secluded they felt. And we, I think, can say we never felt that. We had all these people, from the firefighters to the nurses to everyone, that was constantly supporting us. And so I think that it's just imperative that their stories be told, that the whole community's stories be told. There needs to be a place for the victims to come and reminisce and remember. There needs to be a place where family members who had a loved one torn out of their lives can honor their loved one. There needs to be a place in the community that we can come and remember who Tucson is. I was born and raised in Tucson. I was born at Tucson Medical Center. And so the community here can come to this place and remember how we're different. I don't know if you have the same experience, but sometimes people say, what's so special about Tucson? Well, it's hard to put into words, but this is an example of what is so special and unique about Tucson. And we need to tell the world, tell the rest of the country, and thank our community. And it's also an example of how fragile and vulnerable our free democracy is. And we need to celebrate the fact that we are a free country and we will endure, and together we thrive. Thank you.
And now I'm going to introduce to you a very special person, a survivor of the January 8th 11 tragedy, who was with his wife, Carol. the morning of the tragedy in line to speak with their representative. Please help me welcome Ken Darushka.
Thank you, Crystal, and thanks to Brian and Nancy, two wonderful people. Those of us who were there that morning, and I want to, on behalf of all the families of those that lost their lives that day and those that are forever shaken and affected by the shooting, the survivors and their families, I want to thank all of you for coming to this. And I want to thank you for being part of this memorial project that we have going. So important, and let me tell you why. When the shooting started and I was able to grab my wife, throw her to the ground, get on top of her just as the shooter came up and fired a shot towards her head, into my arm instead, deflected the bullet, and she was saved that way. When we finally made our way into the Safeway, after being helped in there after the shooting stopped, and by the way, 32 bullets were fired within 15 seconds, so it may sound like a long time from start to finish, but that didn't take very long at all. We were sitting there waiting for the ambulances and helicopters to take people away, and I reflected for a minute on how wonderfully I thought everybody was doing their job, so professional. Nancy mentioned how her and David, guardians from heaven, came and started attending to people they didn't know, just whoever needed some help. And they saved lives by being there that day. There's no doubt about it. And the first responders, instead of running around chaotically, they all seemed to know exactly where they should be, what they ought to be doing. The very professionalism was remarkable to us. We finally, the next day, got to reflect on what happened, and while we were recovering, I was amazed at the outpouring of support within the community. As Nancy mentioned, some of the other communities weren't that gracious, but ours went above and beyond. We felt that. Those of us that were still involved, those that were still in the hospital, those that were suffering, didn't know, clinging to life, were affected by the memorials that were set up at Gabby's office, at the Safeway, and at University Medical Center at the time. These were remarkable to us because what they gave us was the feeling that all of you out there in the community cared. All of you were supportive. We got cards, we got letters, and of course, all your prayers were a marvelous thing for us for as far as healing. And this is not only our story and not only our memorial, but this is a memorial for all of you, all of Tucson, all of Southern Arizona. This is your memorial because this tells the story of what really happened that day. You know, you can read a little bit about it, but when you go to the memorial and you actually see the memorial, you actually can then go and look at the interactive videos that are going to be inside the first floor. You'll be able to get a big picture of what happened that day and marvelous activities and personal stories of each one of us that were there that day. That's a learning experience. We want the kids to be able to come and learn about civility. It's amazing. In a few months after this event, tragedy, I shouldn't call it an event, it's a tragedy, it seemed like Tucson was a much more civil place. People were nice to each other for a while. Since then, things have gone back to normal, I think. But it's important for us to reflect on and teach young kids what happened that day and what the reaction of this town was. So I just ask all of you that are listening or seeing this video, that are in the audience today, please, let's support this memorial. We need to see this built. It's very important. We've got massive support from our community to see this built. Now we need to step forward and put the money where your support is and get this thing built so that we can show the world what Tucson is made out of. Nancy mentioned some of the other communities weren't as fortunate as ours, and we want the world to know that Tucson is a unique place and it's very different. And we'll only be able to tell that story in this fashion by having a good memorial out there, and that can help us tell that story. So please, let's support that. Financially, this is going to be a boon to the area, we believe. 100,000 visitors are expected that first year alone. That brings about $3–4 million in revenue to the area and increased transportation, extended hotel stays, restaurants and bar tabs. So this is, important. It's important to the community. It's important to every one of us as Tucsonans. So please, let's support it, and thank you for your support.
You've now heard from representatives from the cross-section of those involved on January 8th, 2011. Now it's time to ask for the public's help. We're not only asking Tucson, Southern Arizona, and Arizona, but we're asking the nation to stand with us for freedom of democracy, to provide a place that people can go, and our kids can go, and our grandchildren can go to 100 years from now, and know that they have the right to meet with their representative and not be afraid to do so. We've started a GoFundMe page that people can go to the GoFundMe.com and type in January 8th Memorial. It's easily found that way. We also have a partnership with the county. The memorial will be built outside of the old county courthouse, and we have approved some donor recognition opportunities in the gardens that people can find at our website as well. It's important to note that we have 2 federal bills that are currently pending in the House and the Senate. House Bill 362 and Senate Bill 62 are both in the Natural Resources Committee waiting to be heard at a federal level. That would make the January 8th Memorial a national memorial, an affiliated area of the National Park Service. We're asking the nation to join us now. Join us in a non-political way, a uniting effort, so that our children from now on can have a place to reflect and understand what happened that horrible day and understand the hope that resides in our nation. We will open for questions at this time.
Crystal, were you surprised that the legislature voted to not fund this memorial during the past session?
So I'm going to answer, and then I'm actually going to have a couple of the members of the board come up and the survivors answer that question as well. So I think that the answer is yes, I think we were surprised in some sense. Our bill was actually approved by the Appropriations Committee in the House 100%. It was then sent on in the State House and approved 49-11. And then it was not heard in the Senate side. I don't know that we'll ever understand fully the reasons that that occurred, but I do think that it is justifiable for us to stand here today and to say that we are a group united. We have different political views. None of this is political for us, and so we move forward from that. And I'd like to ask Ron Barber to come forward at this time.
She asked the recovering politician to speak about this, I guess. You know, Crystal's absolutely right. We had tremendous support. I want to just recognize Representative Clodfelter, who introduced the bill, along with members of both parties. And as she said, it was passed unanimously out of the Appropriations Committee in the House. Great support from the chairman of that committee and the entire committee. And what's really remarkable, too, is how significantly it passed out of the House and the full House with only 11 dissenting votes. Here's my take on what happened on the other side. It became politicized when it shouldn't have been. There were Democrats and Republicans and Libertarians and people of all points of view there that day. The survivors were of all of those political persuasions. Those who were killed, the same. So I'm really concerned that people who wanted to stop this memorial from being funded in the Senate decided to politicize it. And it's not political, but that's what they made it. And as a result, some people got skittish over in the Senate side, and the bill never got heard. So we want to go past all of that, because as Crystal said a few times, and myself as well, This is not a political statement, except in this one way. When Gabby and I were there that day, that was her 21st Congress on Your Corner event. She believed, as I did when I was elected, that the only way that you can be a good representative of the people that sent you to Washington, D.C., is to meet with them, to be accessible to them, to let them know who you are and to hear from them directly without any filters of staff or town halls. And that is a very sacred part of our democracy. Accountability to the people, transparency, and access. And that shooter attempted to stop, he did stop and disrupt that kind of a notion. And we have to continue it. And certainly Gabby was dedicated to that as I was. You have to have that access. So the memorial also makes the point that you cannot stop democracy and the normal communication between the elected official and their constituents. That's a part of it, not all of it, but that's unfortunately how it went down, and people who made it political, quite frankly, ought to be ashamed of themselves because they know better, including a gentleman from Tucson who decided to send a wild and crazy email to senators and got them all riled up. I should say shame on them for not discounting this politicization of something that's not political.
Ron, before you walk away, Senator Griffin, who is the majority whip at the meeting, said that this has nothing to do with politics. I'm excited about that. It has everything to do with budgets. That's what she says. You say just the opposite, and you say it's all politicization. There are other people out there who also say that because of what Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords is doing and what Mark Kelly is doing as advocating for gun control, that is politicization as well, so that you have politics playing on both sides of this issue.
Well, first of all, I want to say that what Gabby and Mark are doing is what they're doing based upon their experience, and I can tell you how that started. After Sandy Hook, they were so stunned by the tragedy, they decided to go and do something about reasonable gun laws. But that's a separate entity. The Memorial Foundation is not that entity. The Memorial Foundation, since its very beginning, and to this day, and well into the future, never politicized this. It's not about gun issues, other than the fact that people were killed by guns, but it's about building a lasting memorial to the people we lost, the people who survived, the community that supported us, and these incredible first responders and ordinary citizens who came to our aid that day. And any attempt to make it political is just wrong-headed. And it's trying to bring something into it that just doesn't exist inside of what we do. We meet every month as an organization. We never talk about this being about gun issues or gun laws. We only talk about it being a remembrance. And as far as Senator Griffin is concerned, she has her own opinion, and I still share it. I will say this, though, that we understand that there are a lot of priorities in this state. Having been in the legislature at the national level, not everything gets funded. And when it came to education and the bond issue for the university and many other issues that needed to be funded, ours obviously wasn't the top priority, or it would have been, despite the Senate opposition. The governor was supporting us, as was the House. So if you want to kind of mix what Senator Griffin said into this mix, you have to also understand what was said by the House, overwhelmingly, and by the governor's office, who was more than willing to support it. And the group that's supporting us, the foundation, board, and the citizens who have joined our honorary committee, they are of all walks of life, all political persuasions, and they know, as I know, that it's not about guns. It's really about a memorial to the people we lost and everything else that happened that day and subsequent weeks and months.
How do you separate the two?
By saying it plainly, by calling out people who are trying to politicize it as being wrong, as being trying to make something out of it that's not. Not one piece of our literature, not one piece of our public statements, not anything we've testified in the House, here, and if we'd had a chance in the Senate, at the federal level, in the House of Representatives and the Senate, we have support from Senator McCain and Flake for the memorial, and Congresswoman Sally in the House. They're hardly hardcore Democrats. And so if you want to make it political, that's your choice. But we say it's not political, and anything you say to that, in that effect is wrong, and you should be ashamed of bringing that into it.
Next, I'm going to ask Survivor Ken Darushka to come back up to discuss a few issues that have come up about the bond proposition that didn't pass and the will of the people to build the memorial. Ken?
Thank you, Crystal. If Senator Griffin was concerned that that this was political, why didn't she put it forth in the Senate and let the senators vote on it? Those are the ones we elected. You know, she shouldn't make a unilateral decision. That's very disingenuous of her. She's also published information saying that the people don't support it because they didn't pass the bond issue. Well, that's just ridiculous. And that also is disingenuous, and I understand one of the supervisors from the county has said that over and over again also. That's not right. And I know what took place at that bond issue because I was part of the board's commitment to go before the bond issue committee that was doing a fabulous job in putting together. They had about 36 people, huge number of people sitting around listening to every group's request to be included into that bond issue several years ago. And you had people from all walks of life. There was even one person there representing the homeless to make sure that they weren't forgotten in the bond issue. So everybody was supportive. Before anything got put into the bond issue, you had to have pretty good support from a wide variety of people. When I finished my presentation on the memorial, they took a vote, because they took a vote after each one of those. We had unanimous, not one single person voted against the bond issue, against the memorial being included in the bond issue. Unanimous support. So the fact that the bond issue didn't pass is not because of our doing, and people in general, the bond people were supportive, and the community was supportive. If we would have been able to vote on that bond issue by item, I guarantee you we would have passed, if not unanimously, certainly very high percentage. So for these people to claim this kind of stuff, they're just being disingenuous.
I just have to say something. You know, when I came out of the Safeway, and I was crawling around in people's blood, and I was doing mouth-to-mouth on a man who was dying on the sidewalk, I did not ask him his political affiliation. I didn't ask anybody even why they were there. I simply went out and started plugging holes and trying to save lives. And this memorial is not about any political action. It is about the response of a community to a tragedy.
Are there any other questions? Well, I'd like to also announce that we have such a great relationship with Pima County and the City of Tucson. We currently have in cash and pledges for building the exterior memorial itself nearly $1 million in cash and pledges towards that. The total budget for the memorial is $5 million. If we end up not using all of that money, we will take the portion that's extra and put it into an operations and maintenance endowment fund to help the county with those costs. And so the public is very supportive, and we have seen an outpouring since the notification that the state appropriation didn't get heard in the Senate. And we are calling on people to stand with us now. And we appreciate your time today. Several of us will be around after if you have questions. And thank you for joining us.